Good evening, everybody. Welcome to The Real Report. As we sit here in Shadowban Purgatory, we're going to be talking about nuclear war, Armageddon, the Great Sun. So if you guys haven't already, hit the like button, leave a comment down below because it's really going to help me out, even if it's just a thumbs up, as I sit here being punished by my draconian overlords for wrong think and independent views. So we're going to see if we can break free. I don't really know how that's going to go, but that's where we're at. Now, what you're looking at on the screen here is a clip of the Castle Bravo nuclear test detonated February 28th, 1954 at the Bikini Atoll in the Pacific. Castle Bravo, at 15 megatons, was the largest nuclear test conducted by the United States ever, and it's also been featured, of course, in a handful of films. It's absolutely mind-boggling footage to watch. The fact that this is a closer reality than most people are willing to admit. And not only closer than most would admit, a lot of people are, frankly, chomping at the bit for this to happen. Now, to prove that point is, of course, the entire purpose of today's video, starting things off with a foreign policy .com article, Why NATO Needs to Plan for Nuclear War. As the alliance meets this week, leaders must discuss how they will react if Russia uses weapons of mass destruction. NATO defense ministers will gather this week, and the risk that Russian President Putin might use nuclear weapons in Europe has, of course, risen. Recent massive disproportionate missile attacks launched against Ukraine in response to the truck bombing of the Kerch Bridge reinforce the notion that the Kremlin remains unpredictable. I find that to be a laughable remark, given the fact that they're, of course, fighting a war. Now, of course, there's options that would punish Moscow and safeguard alliance interests without necessarily propelling the West up a nuclear escalation ladder. Oh, well, that's reassuring. Let's continue. While their use against a nuclear-armed foe might lead to uncontrolled escalation, it's unclear that this would occur against a non-aligned country without the ability to respond in kind, like Ukraine. So it's possible there could be some military efficacy. Would likely further, if Putin were to launch nukes, unify NATO and alienate his remaining friends in Europe. Well, last I checked, about 35 countries, including some of the bigger allies, and bigger GDP members on the globe, all refrained from commenting on the referendums for the annexed regions in Ukraine. So he might have more allies than NATO and the West are really expecting. Now, of course, continuing on, one area where the Kremlin may be willing to risk all that and more is in defense of Crimea, as pundits love to throw around the word illegally annexed in 2014 by Moscow. And if and when Ukrainian conventional military forces approach Crimea in hopes of liberating it, Putin may feel more tempted to use nuclear weapons. That is an astute observation. Second, one of the points here, NATO is conducting a robust assessment of possible responses and would signal to Moscow that WMD use would bring not only greater U.S. involvement, but also broad-based European action. Note here the big takeaway, greater U.S. involvement. That's going to be very important, so hold on to that thought. NATO to proceed with planned nuclear exercises next week as they go through with their scheduled, of course, exercise, despite the ratcheting nuclear rhetoric surrounding the Russia-Ukraine war. Only days ago, we saw President Pudding Cup warn the risk of the world witnessing Armageddon. If you guys didn't see that, it's, like I said, it's really hard to wrap your head around to watch all of this in real time. I can't tell if people are geniuses, although I believe that they are genuinely stupid. They have absolutely no idea what they're saying, what they're doing, or what the consequences are going to be. Now, of course, a handful of select depopulationists know exactly what they're doing. Now, as part of the drills, nuclear warhead-capable aircraft will be deployed in mock raids. However, they won't be carrying live bombs, Brussels assures us. Now, the real question is, of course, unpredictable factor and how Russia would react, or if its military would possibly decide to mirror such drills. This is turning into a do as I say, not as I do, and then there will be consequences for copying us. little unreasonable. And also an interesting one, Sweden refuses to share the results of the Nord Stream pipeline explosion investigation with Russia. All I'm going to say there is there can only be one reason for that, eh? 14 of the 30 NATO member countries will be involved in the exercises, which was planned before Russia invaded Ukraine in February. Now, the main part of the maneuvers are going to be held more than 625 miles from Russia, and 3 NATO members maintain their own nuclear arsenals. Of course, that's the US, France, and Britain, while others host these nukes as part of an alliance nuclear sharing program. Doesn't sound very smart to me, but hey, Poland has this month controversially offered to Washington that it's ready and willing to host US nukes in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Unprecedented consequences would await Russia if Vladimir Putin used nukes in Ukraine. It would almost certainly be drawing a physical response from many allies and potentially from NATO itself. The words were issued on the eve of a closed-door NATO nuclear planning group meeting. And the news only gets worse from here, as Russia's army will be annihilated if it nukes Ukraine, EU foreign policy chief warns. I just want you guys to think about this. You know, I say a lot of these headlines with a kind of sarcastic, mocking tone because, frankly, there's no other way to approach headlines like this. You know, if you can't joke about your impending doom, then, hey. So, EU foreign policy chief has warned Russia that its army would be annihilated by the US-led military alliance. Again, US-led military alliance if uses of nuclear weapons against Ukraine, while the Kremlin has advised Washington of its nuclear red line. Of course, Putin keeps saying he's not bluffing. Probably not somebody you want to push into a corner, just saying. Of course, here it is highlighted, this is not a bluff, Putin said. Quote, those who try to blackmail us with nuclear weapons should know that the weather vane can turn and point towards them. Think about that. Hopping into the next one, Kremlin warns of nuclear World War III that will be catastrophic. Russia bluntly warned Thursday that further meddling by Western powers in Ukraine would spark World War III. Lovely rhetoric, huh? This time a nuclear one that will be catastrophic for all mankind. Seems that they at least somewhat comprehend what they're saying, that nobody is going to win when entire swaths of land are vaporized. Top Kremlin officials specifically threatened worldwide carnage if NATO approves Ukraine's bid to join its alliance. Kiev is well aware that such a step would mean a guaranteed escalation to a World War III. It's absolute insanity. Secretary Lloyd Austin, who also has the same IQ as Anthony Blinken, who, if you don't know, is about room temp at best, committed to defending every single inch of NATO's territory. I feel safer already. Of course, Ukraine joining NATO would spark World War III, threatens Russian security official, diving a little bit deeper into that in another article. Allowing Ukraine to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization would result in a guaranteed escalation to World War III, following last month's annexation of 4 breakaway regions in the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine. Zelensky requested a fast-tracked admission into the U.S.-led NATO military alliance. And even out of MSN, France will not trade nuclear strikes with Russia over Ukraine. It seems Macron is finally using his brain. France will not respond with nuclear weapons should Russia use them against Ukraine, French President Emmanuel Macron said. Our doctrine, this is a quote, rests on the fundamental interests of the nation, Mr. Macron told public broadcaster France 2 on Wednesday. They are defined clearly and wouldn't be directly affected at all. For example, there was a ballistic nuclear attack in Ukraine in the region, so he does not want to escalate fairly close to his borders in comparison to the U.S. with Russia. I think a lot of countries should also take a step back and cool this rhetoric. Nobody is going to win in nuclear Armageddon. U.S. will soon need to deter two major nuclear powers for the first time, the White House says, as we continue to escalate, and every single week when I hop on here and say, welcome to the Real Report, the headlines, as I made a comment last night, truth is stranger than fiction. Within a decade, the U.S. will need to deter two major nuclear weapons powers for the first time. The Biden administration has warned, pointing to the Russian arsenal that is increasingly being brandished by Moscow and an expanding Chinese stockpile. That's right. So, President's new national security strategy, NSS, depicts China as the most capable long-term competitor, but Russia as the more immediate. The United States will not allow Russia or any power to achieve its objective through using or threatening to use nuclear weapons, the document says. Here's where things get really interesting out of Politico magazine. In case you guys didn't know that these people are complete fools, well, you're about to find out for sure. Out of their foreign affairs segment, Russia simply cannot be allowed to unleash nuclear weapons in Ukraine. This is from Leon E. Panetta, a former defense secretary and CIA director. The only reason I give this article any focus. In the 21st century, it is still madness to believe there can be an acceptable use of nuclear weapons. During the Cold War, which my commentary here, the Cold War never ended. You're also a fool if you think otherwise. It was clear that the consequences of a nuclear attack would be mutual annihilation. That has not changed. Again, during the Cold War, we are still in the Cold War, whether we know it or not. Mutual annihilation. Principle that has not changed. Now, any attack will demand a firm response, and any firm response will risk the danger of escalation. It is precisely because the use of any nuclear weapon is so unthinkable that Putin cannot be allowed to continue his threats without understanding the full consequences to him and his regime. He says he is not bluffing. He states that we cannot afford to bluff either, aka the West. If he makes a reckless decision to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, the U.S. will respond with direct military force. Again, United States, direct military force against Russian troops. I'm telling you, they are begging for this to happen. One more time. U.S. will respond with direct military force against Russian troops waging the war in Ukraine, ensuring Putin's defeat there. Nobody's going to win if we put boots on the ground and he launches nukes. We must be prepared to use U.S. military assets, including combat aircraft, cruise missile strikes, to ensure that Putin cannot threaten Ukraine with nuclear weapons. President Joe Biden has made clear that U.S. forces, okay, here's the real kicker, again facing Russia and China, U.S. forces will be used to defend Taiwan from an attack from China. The same pledge should apply to Ukraine if Putin makes the decision to use nuclear weapons. We cannot fight two fronts. The United States is not what it used to be. We don't have the capacity. You guys have seen a dozen videos that I've put out talking about the Department of the Army, the Department of the Navy, saying that our weapons stockpiles are depleted. Most of NATO's stockpiles are depleted. We are running out of munitions, especially 155 millimeter rounds to send to Ukraine. We don't have Stingers to send to Taiwan. They're talking about 2024, 5, 6. Is when we might get around to being able to ship some to those other countries. This rhetoric is very hard to wrap your head around. Nations cannot afford to appease or be intimidated by bullies. The only message tyrants understand is force. I think this headline is very interesting simply because depending on where you are, you can apply that to any country you disagree with. Here, though, the United States, NATO, and Ukraine have made clear that they remain unified in opposition to Putin's aggression. Again, you can simply flip their headlines to Russia's perspective. And here's an asinine stat here. This guy from the CIA is trying to estimate 70 to 80,000 of Russia's soldiers have been killed or wounded in the war. I just reported, 2 weeks ago, they're talking about maybe 15, 20,000 from the current CIA director is more likely. And of course, they're going to lose merit here for saying 80,000, which is a ridiculous number. If he lost half of his forces in Ukraine already, I think more people would be not only opposing the war, but that would be the greatest propaganda you could ever put out from the Ukrainian side, that you have slaughtered 80,000, as they quote the orcs, as you will. So, if you guys like this video, leave a like, comment down below, subscribe, share with friends. Definitely, like I said, I'm going to harp on it for the third time. Leave a like because it's going to help me, hopefully, in theory, break out of YouTube semi-shadow ban purgatory. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay safe out there. Godspeed. Dig your bunker deep.